Welcome everyone to the Hyde Park Book Club. We're just about ready to start. So I'm going to wait just a minute or so. We've still got people coming in the room. All right, welcome everyone to the Hyde Park Book Club. We are sponsored by the Hyde Park Historical Society and Chicago Hyde Park Village. We're delighted tonight to welcome Pemon Rami, author of When Blackness Was Golden. I would just like to again welcome you all here, and I'm now going to turn this over to Dottie for the introductions.
Greetings, and I'm pleased to introduce Pemon, who was born and raised on Chicago's South Side. And to be exact, he was born in Providence Hospital and raised in the 3651 building of Stateway Gardens, which was demolished in 2007, where he lived with his parents and siblings. And while in his teens, Pemon was cast in a recurring role on the weekly TV series Bird of the Iron Feather, television's first Black soap opera. He also appeared in a number of feature films and was the first African-American film casting director in Chicago. His career has spanned the body politics of the civil rights movement, the student movement, the Black arts movement, and the Black theater and film movements. An internationally renowned film producer and director, he's a member of the board of the Illinois Arts Council, a former member of the Joseph Jefferson Theater Awards Committee, a former National Endowment for the Arts Program Evaluator, and past Director of Education and Public Programs for the DuSable Museum of African American History. He's the recipient of many awards, including the 2017 Visionary Award from the Pan-African Film Festival in Los Angeles, the country's most prominent Black film festival. His film, 93 Days, covering the Ebola virus in Nigeria and starring the renowned Danny Glover, garnered him a nomination for an African American Award and African People's Choice Award. So welcome, Ramon, and I'll turn the program over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me. It is a pleasure being here. You know, I'm not going to start this the way that I was originally going to start. I'm going to get to the slide so that I do want to share some information. But as I was listening to you talk, in 1975, I got married. So it's been 48 years for us. And when we got married, we moved into 5020 Lake Shore. We were one of the first families to live in that building when it was constructed. And my children went to Shoesmith, and so we were Hyde Parkers for a long period of time. So to be able to start here and to talk with you all is just a wonderful thing for me, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. But this being Black History Month, I wanted to start, before I get into the crux of my book, and we can do some of that in discussion, I wanted to sort of give you an overview of Chicago and some of the seminal events that took place here as well. So I'm going to share my screen as soon as I, once again, remember how to do that. Okay, it should be here. Okay. And okay, so I have the tendency of starting my presentations with my maternal grandmother and grandfather who came to Chicago during the Great Migration. My grandfather, who's pictured here, was a Pullman porter, and he came to Chicago, and they lived at 219 and 56th Street. Along with my mother and father, who followed them, well, my mother who followed them up here, and my father, who came up from Oklahoma. And they met at the Thin Shell Candy Company, which was on 47th Street in Ashland. They were making peppermint candy. My father was making the red portion, and my mother was making the white portion. There was a window in between them. And when she walked in and she started working, my father told his coworker that they were going to get married, and they did. And so Chicago has been very dear to me, because had they not moved here, I would still be in Oklahoma and probably a farmer like the rest of my cousins. Perish the thought. Anyway, okay. So I want to start with Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable and the fact that he was the first non-native settler that was in Chicago from 1770 to 1779. And this is a portrait, picture that was drawn by a famous artist who lived from 1908 to 1993. And some of his work was in Life magazine. He was a brilliant artist, and this is a rendering that he did that was presented to me while I was at the DuSable Museum. And of course, the Michigan Avenue Bridge is officially named the DuSable Bridge. And the reason for that is because Pioneer Court, where the Tribune building was, is where his original settlement was located. And so that's why the bridge is named after him. And then, of course, in 2021, Lakeshore Drive was renamed the Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable Lakeshore Drive in his honor. Most people know about the Chicago fire that happened, the first Chicago fire, but this is the second one that happened 2 years later in 1874. And it began on Clark Street, and it basically eviscerated the Black community, but it was also an area that was filled with immigrants. And so there were brothels there were immigrants there, and the fire burnt up the majority of that area. So African Americans, after that point, which was in an area which was called Bed Bug Row, and I can only imagine why it was called that, because of the bed bug. Anyway, the fire was attempted to be put out by the African American firefighters unit that was in the area. However, they weren't able to control the fire. As a matter of fact, their firehouse was actually burnt down as well and was never rebuilt. In 1904, Wyndham Phillips was built, which is on 39th Street. And it was originally a campus that was designed for the wealthy children that lived in the mansions up and down King Drive and Michigan and in that area. But by 1970, 90 students had been enrolled in Phillips. And the majority of the wealthy people that were in the mansions began to move out. The Great Migration was pushing into the area, so Black families were beginning to move in. And so by 1920, the school became the first Chicago predominantly African-American high school. My sister and I are fortunate to be members of the Wyndham Phillips Hall of Fame, along with Nat King Cole, Diana Washington, Quincy Jones, Marla Gibbs, the Johnsons that founded Ebony Magazine and the Hair Company, and tons of other people that went to that school. In June 1905, the Pekin Theater opened at 27th and State. It was the first Black-owned musical vaudeville company in the United States. So between 1905 and 1911, Robert Motts had a training ground there. They were developing Black theatrical talent. Vaudeville acts came through there, as well as musical comedies. In 1905, the Chicago Defender opened, and the Chicago Defender was very active and responsible for a lot of people coming to Chicago during the Great Migration. As the Pullman porters would go down south, they would take the Chicago Defenders with them, and it would talk about the opportunities that were available in Chicago, and it motivated a number of people to come this way. And this is the Great Migration that I was talking about. So millions of people, undirected by individuals, decided that the South was not a good place for them to be, and they began to spread out between 1910 and 1970. So in 1910, William Foster was the founder of the first African-American film company here in Chicago. He also worked at the Pekin Theater. He was an advisor and a business manager. And in addition, he directed the first film. Most people that are aware of early Black film in the country credit Oscar Micheaux as being the godfather of Black film. That has more to do with the amount of films that he produced rather than the fact that he was the first. As a matter of fact, he worked with William Foster for a while before he went out on his own. But he did develop an incredible body of work within that process. Provident Hospital. It was mentioned that I was born at Provident. It opened in 1891. It was the first African-American hospital in America. They also had a nursing school. And the legal papers were drawn up in 1891 for the training school and its association. It was a brick building in 29th and Dearborn. They had 12 beds originally. And following the fundraising campaign, they opened up the new campus at 36 in Dearborn. It is now located and owned by the city, but it's now located at King Drive at 51st Street. The Regal Theater opened on King Drive in 1928 and was the foremost institution for the development of talent, and you could basically see almost anybody there, all the big names. When I was a child, I could go on the weekends and see the Jackson Family and Peg Leg Bates and Smokey Robinson and all these people. It was relatively cheap, and we were able to go there for entertainment. 1933, my mentor, Ted Ward, became the recreational director at the Abraham Lincoln Center. And through this position, he was really one of the first people that taught theater and drama to youth in the area. Ward went on to found the Negro unit of the Federal Theater Project along with Richard Wright. And that was in 1933. In 1938, Fannie McConnell Ellison, executive director of the Chicago Negro Theater Project, which was housed at Good Shepherd Theater, which was then renamed the Parkway Community House, started a theater company as well. So 1940, the Southside Community Arts Center, which is still operating, was the first African-American art museum in the United States. It was developed as part of the WPA program, and it's the only one out of the 110 art centers that were created under that program that still exist. They still own the building, they own the land. And one interesting point to note about this is that during a period of time when they opened, the artists that were going to the Art Institute would come back to the Southside Community Arts Center on the weekends, and they would teach for free. And so a lot of the training of the early artists was really done by the artists that were at the Art Institute, but they were interested enough in community development to come back and teach, and those classes were free. In 2017, they were named the National Treasure by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And in 2018, they were selected on the National Registry of Historic Places by the Department of the Interior. So if you get a chance, you still should go by. You can still visit. It's in the original building. They have the Baja Steps, which are, it's just an incredible facility. And they're in the process of renovation. So they've redone the windows, they've redone the doors, and they're in the process, as I said, of expanding on that institution. 1941, Langston Hughes founded the Skyloft Players, again in Chicago at the Parkway Community House. And that same year, Ted Ward, they started the Negro Federal Theater. Margaret Burroughs had the Chicago Negro Theater. The Du Bois Theater Club Guild was developed by Oscar Brown Jr. and Richard Durham and Vernon Jarrett. The Temple Players were developed, and the newer Steel Players with John Huston. And John went on to teach in Chicago for a long and extended period of time. And so the beginning of the development of Black theater really started in the 1940s. Supreme Life Building, which is still located at 3501 South Park, which is Martin Luther King Drive now. It was built in 1921. It was the first African-American owned insurance company in the United States. and it's where Johnson Publishing first had their office when they launched Jet and Ebony magazine in 1942. The Wabash YWCA, which is located on 37th and Wabash, 3763. It was the first YMCA that would allow the African American community to be housed there, and they also did job training. In addition, it was the location where Carter G. Woodson formed the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, which led the development of Negro History Week, which ultimately became Black History Month, which we are now celebrating. But it started, and the beginning of it got its roots in that building on 38th Street. The George Cleveland Hall Branch Library, the first African-American library, which was dedicated to African-American study and life. The very first African-American librarian, Vivian Harsh, was housed there as well. And she got that job in 1924. The House of Knowledge, Hammurabi Rob. Hammurabi Rob's House of Knowledge was located in a coach house, which was in the rear of the building that would ultimately become Margaret Burroughs DuSable Museum. Hammurabi was one of the first people that I think had a mobile museum. When I was growing up, we would play baseball or we'd be playing basketball. He would drive up on us, make us stop, come to his van and look at all the books and posters, and he would give us a history lesson. We were trying to get away, but he would show up all the time. And he was the person who took us to the DuSable Museum and the Southside Community Arts Center. He had also published pamphlets and had produced films in Africa, as well as things on African American history. An incredibly knowledgeable person and responsible for a lot of the history of Chicago. I should say Black Chicago. Okay, so anyway, 1961, the Ebony Museum of Negro History and Art was founded at 38th and Michigan. It ultimately in 1968 moved to its current location and was renamed the DuSable Museum of African American History. It was founded by Dr. Margaret Burroughs and her husband, Charles Burroughs. I mentioned Ted earlier, the Southside Center for the Performing Arts, which was originally opened in 1912 as the Lux Theater. It reopened as the Pickford Theater in 1938. And then it became the Joe Louis Theater after that. And we opened it as it was converted in 1967. And Ted gave me my first professional directing job. And this is a picture of The Monster, which was the first major production that I directed in a major theater in 1969. I was 18 at the time. Okay. 1967, Phil Coran and the Artistic Heritage Ensemble opened the Afro Arts Theater, which was located at 39th and Drexel. This is the foundation for what became Earth, Wind, and Fire. Phil Coran had gone to high schools around the city, had recruited some of the best musicians, and formed this group. So we would go there on the weekend and we would hear Shaka Khan singing. We would hear Miriam Makeba. We would hear lectures by all these incredible intellectuals. And it was a great place to be. It was eventually closed down by the city. It became the facility for a gang, the Rukins, and then it was ultimately torn down. Black Theater Company, 1960 to 1980. So this is basically 15 companies, primarily on the South Side, that were developed during that period of time. And I'm going to go through some of these because some of them are intricate to Hyde Park specifically. So the New Concept Theater, Marcus Nelson, they did historical work. ETA, which was originally Ebony Talent Associates, is still located at 76th and South Chicago. XBAG, the Experimental Black Actors Guild, was on 67th Street, right off of St. Lawrence. The Chicago Theater Company ultimately took over that facility. The Kumba Workshop, Val Gray Ward, was housed originally at the Southside Community Arts Center, and then in her own facility at 2222 South Michigan, which was a facility that was originally owned by Al Capone. So when she moved the theater in there, they found some doors where you could escape to the alley and so forth. So it was really kind of cool. The Kumasi Players, Van Jackson, they were housed between Jackson Park Fieldhouse and Washington Park Fieldhouse. The Cultural Messengers, Harold H. Mark Williams. His facility was located in Harper's Square, straight on the corner of Harper's Court, I'm sorry. It was right on the corner of 72nd. And he was there for a long time, teaching classes and doing performances. The Independent Professional Performing Artists is a group that Maseko and I formed right after we closed the Lewis Theater. The Black Heritage Theatrical Company, the Reverend Spencer Jackson family, which I refer to as the original Jackson Five. They were a spiritual group, but they also had a historical theatrical company. And they toured the city and the country, performing primarily gospel plays. The Black Ensemble, founded by Jackie Taylor, is still up on the north side, up on Clark. And I believe she's celebrating 50 years. The Lamont, I'm sorry? Okay, I believe that they're celebrating 50 years this year. The Lamont Zeno Theater was on the west side. The Ajabu Children's Theater was on the west side. Ira Rogers and his company did a lot of production work in Hyde Park at Harper Court Theater, as well as at some of the churches in the area. And he was a lifelong Hyde Park and did a lot of film work. Jerry Jones, on the other hand, was the producer and director. The majority of his work was done at the original McCormick Place. And then the New Era Theater Company by Rodney Graham was in a house located on 83rd Street in the basement where he did his performances. Okay. 5200 South Harper in Hyde Park is named after Oscar Brown Jr. Brown staged musicals at the Harper Theater during Summer in the City in 1967 and Big Time Buck White at the former church located at 54th and Blackstone, where the church once stood. And I don't remember the name of the church, but somebody in this group is going to help me remember that name. I had the good fortune of traveling to New York in 1969, and it was my first trip to New York. And I got off at Union Station. I get off the train and I run into Oscar Brown Jr. and Muhammad Ali walking down the street. They were doing Big Time Buck White on Broadway. So I had a chance to spend almost 2 weeks with them doing that performance. And when it was over, like with many of Oscar's productions, he would always bring them back to Chicago. He would always come back to Hyde Park, where his father, and they lived for a long period of time. His father was into real estate, and he considered Hyde Park home. So I wanted to pay special attention to that. The Wall of Respect was an outdoor mural created in 1967 at 47th and Langley, which was on one side of the street, and on the opposite side of the street was the Wall of Truth. It was one of the first mural projects. As you know now, as you travel around the city, you will see murals everywhere. But this was one of the first ones. Now, both of these buildings ended up burning down under mysterious circumstances. And I think some of that had to do with the fact that it became an anchor point. It was a destination place where people would come to see it. There were also constant performances outside of the wall on the streets. Okay, so I wanted to focus on some of these just for a minute, because as we were developing theater, there were really very few theaters that existed. And so for us to be able to put on shows, these were some of the places that we ended up going in to rent or to use to do classes or workshops. The Hull House. Hull House had a theater at 2222 South State Street. They also had one on 67th and St. Lawrence, as I mentioned earlier, in the Parkway. And so we would rent those facilities. The Chicago Park District, at that time, you could go to the Chicago Park Districts and you could almost get a class for anything. And there was no charge. So that's why I ran across my first theater class. I was on the wrestling team. I was on the baseball team. And a lot of that was generated by the parks. As you know now, they charge. And so participation is not as open as it used to be. The YMCA, which was located at 820 to 828 South Wabash, was again a location that had a facility in it that could be rented by performers, and we used it often. The Abraham Lincoln Center, McCormick Place, Parkway, Southside Community Arts Center, the 11th Street Theater, all of those were places that the independent artists were able to go and rent to put on the shows. The Harper Theater was an important part of that. And so you had a lot of the musicals being done at that theater before it was converted. And again, the church at 54th and Blackstone was a constant. The 63rd Street Field House is the place where Phil Coran did On the Beach. So there were a lot of performances there. And then at the St. James Church on 54th and Ellis was another location where a lot of performances were held. In terms of college spaces, the colleges were also very intricate in the development of talent, but also in allowing people to utilize their spaces. So Kennedy King College developed an equity company that most people don't know existed, but also it allowed people to come in and rent that facility, as did Malcolm X. And Malcolm, by the way, had one of the first residency projects in 1970, where they had a lot of us. I was there, Oscar Brown Jr., Duke Jenkins, Julian Swain dancers, the Muntu Dance Company's founder, Alayo, was there. And so it was an incredible space with incredible talent at Malcolm. Northwestern had a Black Theater Company, so a lot of people coming out of that university were intricately involved in the Chicago State University's theater, was also very active, and we were allowed to utilize that space as well. Okay, so these are two murals that have gone up recently. So the one to your left is at the Friend Health Clinic. It's located on 63rd and Cottage Grove. The gentleman drawn in the orange, I think I can do this right here, is me. Oops, I didn't want to do that. I want to go back. Okay, stop. Okay, so this is the one that's at the health clinic, and then when you go around the corner, my wife Masekwa is on the other end. So we're the two elders that anchor this community mural, and then the second mural is on 79th Street between Green and Peoria, and it's basically a replication of the cover of my book. And so as you look at the one to your right, that's me as a teenager with the tam on. That's me now next to that. And that's my wife as an adult now, and then her as a teenager as well. And finally, this is the book. It's When Blackness Was Golden, memoirs that I was able to do. It's available everywhere. It's online at Amazon and Book Baby, and it's at the 57th Street bookstore, and it's available in the Chicago Public Libraries or Barbers downtown. So it's available everywhere. So I'm going to skip off of this. I'm going to stop my sharing, and I'm going to open up for any questions that someone might have.
Well, Pemon, before we get to that, I want to thank you for this absolutely remarkable presentation. There was information there that I never dreamed of. It was so well put together. I thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it. And yes, I now want to open this up. I'm going to put the gallery view on so we can see the faces of everybody who's here in the room who wants to talk. But again, thank you so much for this. And
thank you. And thank you all for having me. And for doing what you're doing. You know, history is extremely important, and somebody has to be the keeper of the history. And if you don't do that, then you have a tendency to create an imaginary history that will not allow people to move forward. There's a term called Sankofa that you have to look back to move forward. And in a way, the only way that we can get beyond the issues that confront us is to confront them head on, and then to allow our children who are not really stymied by the same things that we are, to be able to recognize the good and the bad of our past and be able to move on to a positive future. So I thank you all for continuing to keep the Hyde Park history alive.
Kathy Huff has her hand raised for a question. So Kathy?
Yes, I want to once again thank you for this quick history of it's both African American history in Chicago and that of the South Side in Hyde Park. But my question is, what inspired you to get into the theater and into directing and the theater arts, and then also filmmaking?
When I was in high school, well, okay, let me go back before that. So I was playing Little League Baseball in Stateway Gardens. I was 8 or 9 years old at the time. And I took the equipment back to the Park District, to the field house, because we would go in, we would get bats, balls, gloves, bases, and we would set them up in the field and we would take it back when it was over. And I went back and it was the theater company. It was Okoro Harold Johnson, Abinant Joan Brown. They were there rehearsing the works of Langston Hughes. And I didn't know what theater was. I didn't know what they were doing. I was standing there as a young boy. And they asked me, did I want to be involved? And without knowing what that meant, I said yes. And so
how old were you actually?
I was 7, 8. Yeah, I was either 7 or 8 years old. So that was my first introduction. And so I would just basically help around the theater. I would do runs for them. I would just help. Later on, when I got to high school, I saw a production called Lyrics of Sunshine and Shadows. It was of the works of Paul Laurence Dunbar, but it was written by Oscar Brown Jr. The music was by Phil Coran, and it was directed by Okoro Harold Johnson. It was incredible. And when I saw that show, I said, that's what I want to do. I want to do that. Didn't know what it was called, but that's what I wanted to do. And so I tell people often that had I seen a bad play that day, I would have been a furniture refinisher, because that's what my father did. And that was the path that I was on. But I was exposed to an incredible theatrical production, and it changed my life. And so I began to direct. I started my theater company when I was 14, and we started touring the city and playing music and creating these productions. And I went all over the place. I met my wife in 1968 because I did a performance at Calumet High School. And she was one of the coordinators and the people that brought us in. And so when it was over, I asked her to put a star by her name because I was recruiting for the theater company. I thought it was a good ploy. But anyway, we ended up working together, and we, as I said, been married for 48 years. And so that's what it was. And I think what we have to be in a position to do is allow young people to be exposed, because first you have to see it and then you can be it. If you do not allow a person to look at the world in a way that they see possibility for themselves, then they will always be stymied in whatever they're in. I ran the media department at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in LA for about 10 years. I produced over 300 industrial medical films for them. And when I was there, I was trying to create a method of being able to take what was happening theatrically and turn that into communication vehicles. Because ultimately I felt that everybody needs to communicate a message. And who would be the best people to do that but theatrical people? And so I was able to move through different idioms because people recognized the skills that I had and gave me opportunity. So Sam Greenlee, that wrote Spook Who Sat by the Door, called me one day and said that he had written the movie and he wrote a part for me and asked me would I do it. And I did. And when I came back from shooting it in LA, I got another call from a talent agent. Her name was Shirley Hamilton. And Shirley asked me to be an extra in the film. And I said, extra? I just came back from having a starring role. Why would I be an extra? She said, well, it's a thing with Isaac Hayes. And I really need somebody. Would you go and do it? I said, okay, fine. So I go out and I do it. Isaac Hayes is walking back and forth past me and he stops and he says, do I know you? So we started talking and we were both Leos, born the same month, but he had seen an advanced screening of Spook Who Sat by the Door. And he recognized me from that. And so when we got to be really kind of tight when he was in town filming. So when he left, a couple of months later, I got a call from American International Films that they were doing Cooley High and that I had been recommended by Isaac Hayes. And I got the casting job based on that. A couple of months later, I got a call from Motown that they were doing Mahogany. And then Isaac Hayes had recommended me. So my film career started because of my theatrical career, because of Sam Greenlee, and because of Isaac Hayes. Okay. A long way around to get to that answer, but yeah. That was...
Great story. Great story. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a couple of questions, comments, or whatever. I'm totally blown away and amazed by your positive attitude and your enthusiasm, because having read your book, there are some very dark places in the book for you, both developmentally and physically. I mean, you got shot walking around Chicago one night. You got in a car crash. You were a little kid playing baseball and got bricks thrown at you by unpleasant people who didn't like little black kids in their neighborhood. I mean, how do you maintain your positive attitude through all this?
I wasn't always positive. In my earlier years, I was angry like a lot of people are, because you cannot get beyond not understanding why people are like they are. And so one of the things that you mentioned is when our Little League baseball team was attacked, when we went out the wrong door at Comiskey Park and ended up in Bridgeport. And we were in Bridgeport. There was a little park. We were throwing the balls around. Community came out with bats and bricks and ran us basically from there all the way back to Stateway Gardens. So as a 7 and 8 year old, you're questioning, well, what is it that I did so bad? I mean, what is this about? And so in the earlier years, I became angry. And then I began to realize that ultimately, it's about what you get people to do. And how you motivate change is by, first of all, recognizing it, not being emotional about it, but being strategic in the way that we look at our development. And our young people have to have value for life. Value for life comes about as a result of being able to see a future that allows you to believe that you have the capacity to endure. A lot of young people don't see a future. And so what really saved me, I think, more than anything, was the number of men that stood up and took me under their wing. When I lived in Stateway Gardens, there were families there. Martin Luther King came there to speak on the weekend when he was here in 1966. So I had a chance to hear him speak. The symphony orchestra would play there on the weekend. If you can imagine that in the housing project, the symphony orchestra coming out and playing. It was beautiful. But then two fundamental things happened. One was that the Chicago Housing Authority decided that to live there, you had to be single. You had to be a single. You couldn't be a family. Men couldn't be there. And so they began to run the fathers out. When the fathers left, the gangs took over. it was because there were no men around. I mentioned baseball. There are very few Black men now playing baseball that are from this country. There are lots from Cuba and from other places, Puerto Rico, but not from here. The reason for that is because it takes 18 people to play baseball. You have to have 9 people on each team. Somebody has to organize that. Then you also have to have the equipment. You have to have balls and bats and uniforms. And so the men that used to be around that would, my father, he ran a team for 10, 12 years. And he bought all of that stuff. And he went to the houses and met with the family members and got all of us out there. And he was there every day at 4:30, like clockwork. People used to say that they could set their watch by him because he would have us out on the field every day. And my older brother, took the mantle of that for a while. But it was the men in my life. And I think secondarily to that was theater, because I could express on stage every emotion that I wanted to let go of. But at the same time, I began to realize that theatrically, I could decide what I wanted people to do at the end of the play. Like, did I want them to laugh? Did I want them to cry? Did I want them to stand up and cheer? Did I want them to give money? I knew the power of what theater represented. And so by being in theater and in the arts, it gave me a way to express emotion. It gave me a way to create vision. It gave me a way to connect with people. So I moved to California. I was there for 25 years and came back because my parents became ill. And when I came back, I was at the airport and I ran into a gentleman named, his name is irrelevant. His name is irrelevant. But I ran into the chancellor of City College. His name was Wayne Watson. Somebody's going to say it. But anyway, I ran to Wayne Watson. Wayne Watson says to me, "Do you know that you cast me in Mahogany when I was in high school?" So I said, "Well, no, but it's great." Okay, so I ended up doing a project with them. I go to the grocery store and I run into Dr. Carol Adams. Carol Adams at that point was the director of, he was the secretary of the Department of Human Services for the state. And she says to me, "I've got a massive budget. Would you be interested in doing anything?" And so we began to run into all of these people that were now running institutions that had in essence started with us. The forward for my book is written by Robert Townsend, the fabulous director, comedian, and actor. And we discovered Robert when he was in high school. And I cast him in his first movie and helped him to direct his first play in college and got him in his first commercial. Cece Peniston, if any of you all know her, she was a diva queen. We worked with her when she was 16 years old and helped her to win Miss Arizona. Jamal Green, that's running for mayor, the young guy that's 25, he was part of our Teen Talk radio theater program, where we committed to helping young people between the ages of 14 and 19 as part of our mentoring. So Chance the Rapper was part of that group. The writer, No Name, over 800 young people that we mentored during that period of time. And the reason I did it is because of how many people did it for me. I hope that answers the question.
Oh, yeah, it's certainly. I've got a follow-up question.
Mhm.
Where did you get the energy? Where did you get the energy to do all this? I mean, talking to you now, it sounds like this all sort of happened. You went into theater, you went into this and that, but you had to do an awful lot of hard work. You were working multiple jobs. You were working part-time to support these theatrical enterprises or musical enterprises that you were in at the time. Where did you get the energy?
I think all of us in this room, because I'm looking around at sort of the ages of people, we were part of a generation that believed in working. We were part of, well, first of all, there wasn't a lot of distractions. So you couldn't get online There were no video games. There was none of that kind of stuff. So for the most part, as a young person, I was active. And when you're young, you have so much energy. I didn't have to pay rent. My mother and father were doing that. So I was able to go to all of these institutions. Now, what I will say, though, is Theodore Ward, who was one of my mentors, told me that when I go to school, not to study theater and film. He said that when you go to school, study business and all the technical aspects, but learn the theater and film in theater with the best of the best if you're going to do it. And that's what I did. I ended up working here with the best performers and actors and actresses and directors in town. Then I went to New York and I did the same things. I studied at the African American Studio, Speech and Drama in New York. I worked on Broadway with Oscar. I was at the National Black Theater with Barbara Ann Teer, with Woody King, with Ernie McClintock, all of these fabulous performers. So when I came back to Chicago, the quality of the work that I set out to do was on that level because I had seen the quality in the other people, what they were producing. So I couldn't come back and say, I'm going to do like a church play or a high school play. I had to rise above that. And my art ended up doing it. So, I mean, back to your original question, I just think that during that period of time, we weren't as lazy as we've become. And maybe some of the food has something to do with it. But also the drive. Like I was at the store the other day. I was at Jewel, and this young lady who has to be a teenager behind the counter. I mean, she's checking people out, and she's talking about how tired she is. I'm going, you're not working on the railroad. You have been standing up for maybe 4 hours, and you complaining about being tired because people don't know what work is. And we've lost a lot of that. And I think that we have to encourage young people to be hard workers. First of all, what I say to young people a lot is that you have 24 hours in a day. What you are is what you spend the majority of your time doing. How you spend your 24. So if you spend your 24 hours, if you spend 8 of those chasing girls around, you're not a writer, you're a womanizer. If you say that you're a poet, but you haven't written a poem since you were in the 8th grade, you're not a poet. If you say that you're a filmmaker and you're not making a movie, even if it's with your iPhone, you're not a filmmaker. You can only claim what you are based on the amount of sacrifice you make and the amount of contribution you make in terms of time. And a lot of times people are not putting that kind of time in. And someone asked me not too long ago, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were? Which is the interesting question. And I'm 72. I don't know that I feel that. I think my knees do, but I'm not sure that I do. But my knees know. But anyway.
So
well, I have one follow-up question, and then I'll let everybody else talk, which is, I was reading your book and I thought, how do you remember all of this stuff? There are so many things that went on in your life. I mean, certainly a packed life, if you can call it that. How did you remember all of that to even get it into the book?
Well, first of all, I've always had a really good memory. I remember lines from plays, from the first plays that I did in the early 60s. However, I kept every resume that I've ever written. Every one, from the very first resume. And so I was able to go back and look at dates based on my resumes. And that gave me some help. The other thing is, my wife and I got married really early. Well, we didn't get married early, but we started dating early. And one of the things that we decided was wherever we would move, we would keep our business records we would keep our photographs, we would keep our music, and we would keep our awards. And so a lot of that I kept. And I'm not a hoarder, but I am a keeper. A hoarder, to me, doesn't get rid of anything. I just threw away 20 copies of something that I had in storage. Why did I have 20 copies? I have no idea. I have one now. But I also realized very early that if I was going to be a storyteller, I needed to keep things. I needed to make sure that I was able to document what I was doing because I knew how new it was. So when I opened the Lamazzino Theater in 1973 on the West Side, I did a book that first year of everything we had done, all of the news articles that was done, all of the students that had worked with us, the classes, the plays, everything. And we published that book and we gave it to all the members. That was a source for me as well. The other source was the FBI, which is interesting.
Yes.
So when I was one of the leaders of the student movement in 1968, and a young lady called me in like the 80s, and she was doing her doctorate, and she was writing a book on the student movement, and she said she kept coming across my name, and she wanted to interview me for her book. Which she did. And at the end of it, she sent me a copy of my FBI file from the student movement. Now, what was interesting about it, though, was that they kept everything. They had copies of the flyers that I told some students the other day, I showed them a copy of our Facebook during that period of time, which was the Stetner machine, as many of you all will remember, with the little blue paper that you used to crank the copies out of. Maybe some of you remember that.
Mimeograph, yeah.
Yeah, and mimeograph, yes. And so, but they had everything. So they had copies of speeches. They had copies of who was at who attended the meeting, where they lived, what they said. And so that was a lot of the information that I ended up being able to use for the section on the student movement. However, what I recognized from the FBI files is that the people that were writing about us weren't part of the leadership because they had some of the details wrong. And so I ended up being able to straighten out some of the things that the FBI had gotten wrong. But that was helpful. That was helpful. The other part was, and I know that you all did a lot of work with Tim Black. Tim Black was a motivating factor for me because I realized that I wasn't convinced I was going to get to 100 and still be able to go out and give the kind of lectures and talks that Tim was doing. So I better write some of this stuff down so that if I do get to that state, at least it will be available for people to use. The other thing I want to do, and I didn't want the book to really just be about me. I also wanted to document a lot of people that had made major contributions that no longer exist and most people would not recognize or know their contributions. So the first 5 or 6 pages, that is a libation to the artistic, creative, political folks that I worked with in Chicago. What I've said to scholars is that if you look at anybody, any person that's on that list, you could do a full documentary or a book about them and what they've done. The tragedy of our lack of storytelling is that too many people get away without being able to share what they've accomplished, the material that they have, and to put it in some form that people can go back and use it in the future. And I just had to do that. One final thing on that. I mentioned the Chicago Theater Company, which was on 67th. It was run by a young man named Douglas Allen Mann. And I met Doug when he was a meat cutter at a store in Cabrini Green. And I went in there one day and he recognized me and said he wanted to be in theater, and I sent him to X-Bag. Doug passed. And when he passed, his son, who lived in California, threw all of the records away for that theater. All the photographs, all the scripts, all the letters, everything. Because he was not vested. And he didn't want to take it all back to California. He didn't want to spend the time trying to get rid of it. And so the entire history of that theater, at least, that they kept, no longer exist. And I just didn't want that to take place.
We have some questions in the chat, and Matithia, would you like to go ahead?
No, I just wrote it in the chat.
Okay. So her question is, do you feel your success came from divine timing, right place, right time, and effortless, or just trusting the process or working hard is the way to go?
I've always felt that success is based on outcome. Like what are you trying to do? And so I have never made my success based on the determination of other people, nor have I made it based on trying to reach a level. I've always felt that I've been given a gift. Let me share it in some way. And if the outcome is what I expected in producing it, then I'm successful at it. Now, I've done a lot of things. Someone one day called me an opportunist. And I think that they might have been trying to be negative. But I looked at that as a truth, because I have been an opportunist. I've taken advantage of every opportunity that has been presented in front of me. And as a result, I've constantly changed and reinvented myself. But at the same time, I've been able to touch a lot of people. One of the quotes from my book, it's a personal quote, is that greatness should not be determined by name recognition, but by contributions made and by lives touched. And I truly believe that. I believe that my success is drawn through the eyes of the people that I have touched and have provided a path to follow me. And there have been tons of those. Have I expected anything back from them? No. I wanted to share some things with the world. I've been able to do that. Another quick sad story that just came to my mind. My wife and I were sitting on the couch one day watching The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. This is years ago. And there was a couple on that had done a documentary on chimpanzees. And they showed that, and they were talking about it. And he said, "What are you going to do next?" He said, "Well, we're doing elephants next." And my wife and I looked at each other and said, "Wouldn't that be cool to do chimpanzees and then do elephants?" Well, we set out to kind of do that. And so we ended up doing projects in Haiti, Brazil, Nigeria, London, Trinidad, so it's been a good life in terms of what we've been able to contribute. The other thing is I've got grandchildren and great grandchildren, and that has always been wonderful as well. And I have a 3-year-old grandson who is the first one that I've had that's a Leo. He's born a few days after me. He is so much like me, it's ridiculous. And he's already showing signs of telling people what to do, which is a sign of a director, So we take him to the playground. He's telling the older kids, what to do and, directing them around. So yes, I hope that answered that.
I have another question. Can you say something about Abina Joan Brown and her influence?
Yeah, I was what most people don't know about her is that she was a social worker. She worked for the YWCA for years and was part of their racial justice department and developed a lot of work there. And so her and Okoro came, and Archie Wesson came together to found what originally was called Ebony Talents and Associates, which was going to be a theater company as well as a talent agency. Because keep in mind, in the 1960s, there were no Black talent agencies. And so they had to sort of fight to get people in commercials, but they also had to organize it in a way that it made sense. And she was one of the forward thinkers in terms of institution building and establishing a connection which would help to develop talent. So there were a few things that she felt was important to do. One was to train talent, because where else would they go? I mean, if you think about the 60s and 70s, people weren't really teaching acting in schools. You know, there weren't a lot of training facilities. So you had to sort of learn it, you know, on the side. I taught acting for 10 years, every Tuesday and Thursday for free in my house, forever, you know, and it's a lot of actors that are working, you know, they came through their process. But Abana and just the commitment that she made to keeping that theater open, with all of the challenges that it takes to maintain a nonprofit, is commendable. And the fact that they are still running is testimony to her ability to get funding and to keep it moving. The challenge now is when you build an institution, you're building it around people that support you. So a lot of their audience has gotten older because they started with Abana, you know, so they gotta create a way in which they can create a new path to bring new people into that theater. And what I say to people whenever they come to anything that I'm doing, you know, bring a young person with you. I don't go to, and I can't go to a lot of things that I'm invited to, but if we buy tickets, we contribute those to young people so that they can be exposed the same way that I was. If it hadn't, as I said earlier, if it hadn't been for that play, I would not be sitting and talking to you. So we want to encourage young people. So I say to folks, you know, bring people to whatever you're going to with you. And if you don't have any children, grab one of your neighbor's children, take them with you, because we need to see through their eyes what these experiences with the arts will do for them.
So we have a question. What are some of your memories of Uptown Saturday Night or Let's Do It Again?
Well, no, it was Uptown. I didn't do Let's Do It Again. Uptown Saturday Night, my greatest memory of that is sitting on the bus next to Sidney Poitier for the whole day as we were shooting the scenes, and to see him in his majesty. He was an incredible spirit. He just to watch a man with that level of dignity, loved his voice. And so that's my fondest memory, is sitting with him and him telling stories, and us riding around the bus all day when we were going from location to location. When we shot at the steel mill. As a matter of fact, some years later, I was really down on my luck. I didn't have a job, and I went out to the steel mill to try to get a job because I couldn't find any work, and I was developing a family. And I also went to the pizza place, Pizza Hut. They were just starting Pizza Huts, and they were looking for managers. So I go to Pizza Hut and I apply. And so the guy says to me, "I'm gonna do you a favor, and I'm not gonna hire you because this is not what you should be doing." So I said, "Well, dang, now I gotta wait for the steel mill to call me. I gotta go out there," and I get a call to do a movie in California, which I thought was a steel mill calling, and I never looked back. And so I was able to work from there. The other thing that I was able to do is to convince people that they needed me to help them to communicate. And so as a young person, I worked for the Chicago Park Districts. I worked for Chicago Housing Authority. I worked for Chicago Public Libraries, producing plays to go to all the libraries around the city. Because we had to spread the message There was no black theater before 1968, for example. There was Negro theater. And the way that I separate the difference between that is that most of the plays that were being done by black theaters prior to the 60s were your typical Tennessee Williams plays. You know, they would just do them with the black cast. But in 1968, and specifically after the death of Malcolm X, people began to write more plays. They began to develop more institutions. They began to find more methods of telling their own individual stories. And so for us, it was a matter of helping to develop writers. So I hired Theodore Ward to teach a writing course for new writers in Chicago. So Runako Jahi, who was one of the top writers at ETA, he was part of that program. Shirley Hardy, who went on to work for Warner Brothers in California and write a lot of TV stuff. She was part of that project. But we had to find a way to not only develop talent, but to develop the material that we were going to produce as well. And then finally, we had to develop audiences. And so we went door to door. And so I tell people I had one of the only community theaters that's ever existed when we were on the West Side, because it was truly a community theater. We went door to door. We got parents involved. The kids ran the theater. We had a community ticket, you know, so it was an important part. Okay.
All right, I see one more question in chat that hasn't been addressed, which was, what projects have been your most satisfying directing and or acting experiences?
My most loved acting experience would be in the film The Spook Who Sat by the Door. And I had a chance to shoot. That was my first time shooting in California. And so I had done Mahogany. Well, I did Mahogany a little later, and we shot that here. But to be in California shooting a film and being treated like a star was different. And so I remember that a lot. And that comes to mind. I went to Nigeria a few years ago to produce a film called 93 Days, which is on the Ebola crisis, and it was starring Danny Glover. And I was there for 5 months producing that film. But what was really fascinating was to see a gigantic billboard in Lagos with my name on it as producer of that film. It was a dream come true to be able to do that. But also, you know, I've worked with everybody from Cab Calloway to James Brown to Aretha to Ruby Dee. Damn, why am I missing her name? She played Marva Collins in the movie. God, I can't remember her name. Anyway, I've had a chance to work with all these incredible people, and to be able to watch them and to grow as a result of understanding what true contributions are that these people are making was just great. So that would be that would be it.
All right, well, Pemon, can you see the chat?
Yes.
Because there are some very, very nice statements by people who are very appreciative of what you have done. And just thanking you for your inspiration.
Oh, cool.
Some lovely thank you notes.
Well, thank you. I'm gonna see if I can save this in some way.
Well, we can
Well,
save.
I will. Yeah, I'll save the chat and send it to you.
Okay, great.
It downloads as a separate file. So.
Okay, cool. Well, listen, I appreciate the opportunity to have been here. And the thing that I would like to encourage is that as you decide to get out, that you explore some of the new theaters that are opening. In a few years, Harry Lennox, who's on the Blacklist, and he was in Superman movies and a bunch of that stuff, he's opening a new theater and museum on 43rd and Cottage Grove. The Definition Theater is opening at 64th and Cottage. They're currently doing a show at the Revival on 55th Street. If you can find a way to support a lot of these upcoming institutions, take a small group, call some friends, take a small group and support them, and then come back and then tell them and give them your opinion. What you liked about the show, what you would like to see, because people don't know the impact that they're having, because a lot of times they only hear it from family and relatives. And so as a person that is part of the arts, I realize the impact they can have. And, there is a saying that for you to be healthy, that your mind, your body, and your spirit must all be healthy. So we tithe to churches. People give to churches all the time because they find that the spiritual side of their health is important. Well, the creative side is important too. And so we need to be tithing to artistic institutions the same way we tithe to churches, because they have to survive. Our young people have to be encouraged by positive music, positive dance, positive theater, and positive film. Whenever I give a lecture to students of film or theater, I suggest to them that they operate as if they're going to put their project in a time capsule. And in 300 years, their great, 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 great grandchildren are going to open their time capsule up. And it's going to be a reflection of what they are. It's going to be the only memory that exists of who they were. Do you still write that play? Do you play that part? Because it's going to exist long after you're gone. And so we have to encourage people, especially artists, that your role is to contribute to the uplifting of the society in which you find yourself and to leave the world in a better place.
I just noticed one question that came first, and if we can just take a minute for you to answer this. How did your parents feel about you pursuing a career in entertainment?
They didn't like it originally. My father, I found out at his funeral, was an artist. He was a fine artist. Now, I knew that as a furniture refinisher, he would take furniture that was burned up in a fire, and he would refinish it, and he would do the inlay, and he would do the, like if it was a Chinese table, he would redraw the Chinese artwork and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I knew he did that, but he was actually an artist. But he was so discouraged by art that he didn't encourage it. And so my older brother was an actual fine artist. He was an incredible artist. But my father was not interested in him pursuing it, even though they sent him to the Art Institute. I could not get them to come to any plays that I did. They never came to the plays. They never came to, I had 3 movie premieres here in town, and they never came because they, like most people, felt that there was no up in being in the arts. Because there was no examples of people that had been successful at it, unless, it was Mantan Moreland, Willie Best, or Stephen Fetchit that were doing the comedies on TV, because that was the only things that was happening during that period of time. As I got older, however, and began to be recognized, their opinion changed. So in 1999, I was on the cover of AV Multimedia magazine because I had designed the TV system at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in LA. And my father's response was, well, you finally done something, because everybody doesn't get on the cover of a magazine. And I realized at that point that he had accepted who I was and what I was doing. The final thing I was able to do with him before he passed is that a friend of mine had the luxury the suite at Comiskey Park at whatever it's called now at the White Sox Park, and I was able to take him to a ball game in his wheelchair, but he was able to go to the luxury suite, and he had taken us there as kids, and and as a child had to sit in a restricted areas when he was young. So to be able to take him there and for him to eat a hot dog and to have access to the free beer and all, it was a pleasure that I will never forget, because he knew the times had changed.
Yes.
I wish he was living now just to have him drive through the South Side to see what it has become, some good and some bad. And I will say this in terms of the importance of history. My grandson came here years ago, and I wanted to take him to see the places where I had grown up, where my grandparents had lived, where my mother lived, the stores that we went to, the Hyde. It's all gone. Everything was torn down. And I don't know how many neighborhoods have been decimated in terms of their historic DNA, but the South Side has. And so I've been consulting on projects to try to get markers in place to remember some of these incredible places and people that contributed that are no longer here, but there is value in our memory of their existence and the contributions that they've provided. So long-winded, but that was the answer. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I would like to segue at this moment. Thank you so much for your presentation. And our next book club meeting is a continuation of Black history. It's called Our Kind of Historian, the Work and Activism of Lerone Bennett Jr., who was a longtime employee for Johnson Publishing, but he did many, many other things. So
can I say something on that? I just have one quick comment. When Lerone died, Lerone lived in the building at I forget the name of it, but it's right on the lake. It's like at 50th. It's the building that's north Newport, the Newport building. Anyway, he lived in the I think it was the Newport building. And so when he died, they had an estate sale, and I was invited to the estate sale. It was one of the saddest things I've ever done, because they were selling all the things that he treasured. So his photographs with famous people, his albums, his record collection, his book, and it was just sad, because here's one of the foremost historians in the world that is leaving us, and there's no repository for his work. And so they ended up parceling it off. It was just really, really sad. And so I appreciate the fact that he's coming up. I'm gonna try to come back and participate in that, because his story is well worth telling. So
Thank you.
Again, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It's been an amazing meeting. And what can I say? Dottie, any final comments from you?
No, I just think it's been a priceless evening, and I'm so glad this is recorded, and we'll be sharing it with our email list, and it will be available online.
Thank you again.
Thank you all.
Come on.
Thanks.
Yes. And good night, everybody.
Good night.